Eden Memorial Chapels understands Jewish funerals can take many forms. Some are very Orthodox, while others are more conservative or of a Reformed nature. There's no one better in New York or New Jersey. Go to EdenMemorial.com.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Elon Musk even saying that now these Venezuelan migrant gang Tren de Aragua is taking over apartment buildings now in San Antonio, Texas. We heard about it in Aurora, Colorado. It's a huge issue. It's number 1 or 2 in all the polls, immigration and the economy. And joining us now is the great editor of the National Review, my longtime friend, Rich Lowry. Rich, you wrote a great column saying Harris has no credibility on immigration. Tell us why. I agree.
Yeah, well, if you wanted to be honest about this, what you would have to say is, look, we deliberately blew up the border. It's been a debacle. I regret it. I now realize we should do a much better job and actually enforce the laws of the United States. That might not be a sincere answer, but that would be a truthful answer. And she's not going to say that because that confession would just be too damning. So instead, she dances around. She said in the interview with Bret Baier, I think she said this in 60 Minutes too, from day one, we offered a solution. And what she's talking about is an amnesty bill they offered on day one that had nothing to do with border enforcement. And there wasn't a border crisis on day one because they hadn't successfully blown it up yet. So everything she says on this is so ridiculous.
John Catsimatidis, question. When you intentionally bring in murderers and rapists and drug dealers, can you call that treason?
Yeah, I think they have a sort of a misbegotten worldview that borders are kind of retrograde. They're too exclusionary. They're enforcing them is kind of inherently racist. So it's the right thing to do to let in all these so-called asylum seekers. Now, some of them are legitimate asylum seekers. They've been persecuted wherever they are, and under the law, they can come. But that's a small minority. Everyone else is gaming the system, and they're letting them game it. That's the disgrace of it.
Rich, it's Richard Weinberg. My problem is that you have a system in place, day one, that Trump established, a lawful process where people can come in and be processed. They had to remain in Mexico. It was an orderly system, and it worked. There's a constitutional obligation, a statutory obligation to protect and defend this country and to enforce the immigration laws. From day one, when they started rescinding Trump's executive orders, they violated those obligations. How does she get around that?
Yeah, there's no way to get around it. It's black and white in the law that legal immigrants need to be detained either until they're removed or they have some sort of asylum process that reaches a conclusion, and they're either removed or they get asylum. That's not what they're doing. They're engaged in a deliberate end run around the law. They have the CPB1 app that J.D. Vance was trying to talk about and that vice presidential debate before he gets his mic cut off. It's based on admitting inadmissible aliens, right? They show up at ports of entry, and what you're supposed to do at ports of entry, exclude the people who are inadmissible. Instead, they're letting them in. So it's just a shame and a disgrace.
Flying them in to airports in the middle of the night when nobody knew about it.
Yeah, that too.
What did you make? Did you see, Rich, the comments from Mark Cuban? We were at the top of the show. This is amazing. Of course, the, Shark Tank and basketball billionaire comes out and says he's supporting Kamala Harris. And he said the border crisis just got away from the Biden-Harris administration because he was asked about it on CNN. How do you explain this? How do you explain all these people coming in? And he said, their hearts were just too big. They didn't really realize that they were suddenly allowing. It's like saying, I really wanted to have a nice party and suddenly, 10 to 20 million came. Give me a break.
Yeah, so it's not something that happened to them. It's something they did. They did it deliberately, beginning on day one with executive orders and running through the first several months there and on. And they were warned. People told them this will be a debacle. You'll have a crisis. And it happened, right? And it was only until like 3.5 years later when they realized it might be a political problem that they at least tried to find some way, a facade to appear to be tougher about it. But this is one of the foremost crises that, and I can remember that just deliberately created by an administration. Most crises, there are things that happen to you. Jimmy Carter, it wasn't his fault that Iran took the hostages, right? But this is something Biden went out and did.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, did you also see these comments? Speaker Johnson, it's all over. He told the New York Post, that he had a conversation with Joe Biden and said, why didn't you just, reinstate remain in Mexico? Why didn't you just keep it? Remember, they lifted it, the executive order. It was day one. And Biden actually said to him, Mexico doesn't want to do that. We're not going to do it. Isn't he the American president, not the Mexican president?
Yeah, exactly. And this is Trump. It was diplomatic genius that Trump got Mexico to agree to that and the Central American countries to agree to so-called safe third country agreements. Another important part of that. But how did he do it? He threatened them. He said, I'm going to tariff you or cut off your foreign aid. And then they said, okay, we'll do it, right? And does anyone around the world respect Joe Biden like that or fear him? No, of course not.
Right. And he lifted it. I mean, that's the irony of it all. It was in place. Had he just kept it in place, right, think about how many fewer people would have crossed the border because, but no, he comes in and he lifts it. And then he's like, oh, well, Mexico won't allow me. I mean, this is supposed to be the leader of the free world. I mean, that's an embarrassment, Rich.
The other thing they'll say is that it was inhumane because it was unfair to asylum seekers to stay in Mexico for a couple of weeks or months. But now they're all staying in Mexico to wait to apply for the CPB-1 app. So they're waiting in Mexico one way or the other. It's just by one process we're excluding them, and by the other process we're letting them in. And it's the latter process they want, and they've created and they're defending.
Exactly. It is incredible. Everybody, we're talking to the editor of the National Review, Rich Lowry. Governor Patterson.
Rich, it seems to me that even though Mark Cuban said they had these big hearts, in a way they kind of did, in the sense that they're so idealistic and think that they are outthinking the other side, when in fact they're really opening the door. And I think that's really what the problem was. It may sound strange to believe, but I think Biden actually believed this stuff when he said it, when everybody else was trying to tell him it wasn't going to work.
Do you think he even remembers what he believes? I mean, come on.
I think it does go to what I was saying, or the point I was making earlier. They kind of think the border is immoral. And two, that they just thought everything that Trump did was wrong and immoral. Pete Buttigieg was asked about this a month or two ago on some TV show. They said all we did was repeal child separations. Child separations happened for about a period of 10 days, and then the Trump administration was not going to work. We can't do this, and it was reversed. And all the stuff that worked was totally humane and reasonable and lawful, and that's the stuff they repealed.
Amazing. Ed Cox.
Rich, last December, the huge caravans coming up, records, the number of illegals crossing the border, and President Biden realized he had a political problem going into election year. He started changing his policies, didn't he?
Because he saw the polls.
So he got the Mexicans to do some more, which is good, but we shouldn't have to rely on a foreign country for our defense at the border. And then two, they engage in this process of legalizing illegal entries. So again, CPB-1 app, various forms of parole and temporary protected status that gave people who are really illegal aliens a way into the country and when they don't belong here. But the end result's the same. They're getting in. It's just now they're technically legal, so you can get them off the books as illegal aliens. So that a lot of it is just laundering them a different way and an accounting trick.
Yeah, they seem to be pretty good at that. Thank you very much. Unbelievable. Rich Lowry, really great to have you, and great column there in the National Review, my friend.
Great
Thanks,
weekend.
everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.